active in our community, that really had something to say. And one of my, and I don't think she knows it yet, but she will tonight, one of my closet mentors, because I watch her from afar, and I've probably read about her as much as a stalker probably could read. But we have Roz Pellis that's here with us. Yes, the cat's out the bag now. We have Reverend Roz Pellis, who's here with us. She's a veteran civil rights movement. She's vice president of repairs of the breach, which Poor People's Campaign falls under the umbrella. She's going to be talking with our first segment, along with David Tyson, who's a former RISD school board trustee. A lot of you may know him because of the NAACP lawsuit that he filed for discrimination within the board, which now gave us our single member districts so that it can make it more adapt for people of color to run for school board. And we currently, because of his lawsuit, we have our first African-American woman school board rep, who's my rep, and we have our first Hispanic female school board rep. So kudos to you, Mr. Tyson. And we also have Chris Utley, who is leads us with Be the Bridge, which is a non-denominational group that basically building people to be the bridge. And so I welcome all of you. And so we're gonna get started.
Hi, Miss Danita.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you a quick question. I wanna make sure my dinging doesn't keep interrupting.
I think you might have to you might have to mute yourself in order for the dinging not to happen.
Okay, I think there's another way too, but and I wanted to, invite you all as you're coming on to mute yourselves. When you have questions or comments, you can put them in our chat, and you're welcome to chat with each other there. We're going to come to 2 different question times to share those questions. But if you want to be in your PJs and you don't want us to see you, that's fine too. This is being recorded so that we can share it with other people. So I just wanted you to know that. And we should have our speakers pinned so that you're seeing them whenever you want to. And we're just so happy you're here. Danita, let's introduce each other. Well, first of all, we are Lake Highlands area moms and more against racism. So we're not just in Lake Highlands. We have expanded beyond Lake Highlands. We've got people all over. We are not just moms. That's how we started, and it's how we're led, but we've got dads, teachers, grandparents, neighbors, anyone that wants to stand up and help make the community a better place. We started in response to the murder of George Floyd and have grown since then. We're a nonprofit doing lots of good in the community. And I'm Lowry Manders. Oh, Danita is my partner, and I want to tell you how awesome she is. My sister Danita and I, this is our baby, and we're so proud of it, and we're so thankful to have so many great team members out there involved and helping us and learning and growing together. Danita is an awesome mom of 5 great kids. She works hard, and she works for the Poor People's Campaign, which is what Dr. King started. So she is working hard with that and on PTAs and involved in lots of great things. So Danita, yay. Danita, do you have a Dr. King quote that you want to share before we get started?
I don't have a particular Dr. King quote. I have a Mother Jones quote that my mother gave to me when I was probably 15 and called the news outlet back home when they wouldn't come and pump the water from my neighborhood and the ambulance couldn't get to my dad. And so my mother refers to me as a hellraiser. So my favorite Mother Jones quote is, "I'm not a humanitarian, I'm a hellraiser." And so you'll hear me say that a lot. I'm a constructive hellraiser. I just don't get out there raising hell just for the fun of it. is constructive and it's for an outcome. So that's my favorite quote I like to go by. Um, one caveat that a lot of people don't know, and I love to share this, Laura and I were introduced by a mutual friend. We had never met each other, ever. We had never met each other. We met each other through Zoom. And she came to me and she said, I want you to be a part of this. I need you to be a part of this. And I was like, okay, I love this. And she said, I would love for you to lead it. And I said, no, no, no. As a white woman, you need to lead this. You need to be on the forefront because Black people have been on the forefront the longest. And so having the face of white America leading this charge, especially in our racially charged community, will get us noticed and will take us seriously. And we won't just be a group of angry Black women. And so Larry has become my sister in arms, and I love her dearly. Boomer is like my adopted dog. I showed Boomer to my dog, and so my dog barks at my phone at Boomer. And her children and her husband have graciously, you know, we've through COVID, we've managed to, bump elbows a couple times, but it's great being on this journey, and I love her vulnerability. And that's important for our white allies to be vulnerable, to question, because they don't live like we live. They don't experience what I experience. And her thirst for the Black experience is what makes our bond grow. It's what makes this group grow, because it holds us accountable for people not changing our experiences, but learning from our experiences. And so, Larry, this is awesome. So yeah, that's our story.
Yeah,
And
and we're happy to have lots of other people part of it because we need everybody's help in this. The quote that I think about is the one rereading the letter from the Birmingham jail about the white moderate, and it just really sticks out to me right now. And so that's where I feel called to say these three words, Black Lives Matter, and for it not to scare people. I really just mean these three words, that I think Black Lives Matter, and that I see my community members who are hurting and scared, who are Black, and I want them to know that I stand with them. So today we did have a team putting up Say Their Names, our memorial, at a new location that anyone's welcome to go see. It has Dr. King's photo as someone who was also assassinated because of his race. So it has 196 victims of racial violence and police brutality, including George Floyd, of course. And right now it's at a wonderful church, Ascension Episcopal on Greenville. Well, we had some great teenagers and parents there. And as we were leaving, we did have someone come up, and it's the first time it's happened, to argue and cause problems. And I engaged and I let my blood pressure rise. But I just want to say, it's pretty simple, these words. It's not a political statement. It really just means what it says. It doesn't mean that I don't see that other lives don't also matter. It means I see that you're hurting, and our community formed so that we've got your backs. We've got your backs. You're not alone. So if you want to be a part of that, come check out LHAMAR. And MJ is going to play for us. He put together, that's my 13-year-old son who's more tech savvy than me, some of Dr. King's great quotes. So as you're watching, I would love for you to even put in the chat, which one is your favorite today? Which one really challenges you right now?
resonates with me.
Which one gives you something to do? MJ, can you play that for us? And I'll tell you, it's accompanied by Mahalia Jackson, who you all know was one of Dr. King's favorite singers. I see Miss Roz nodding, yeah. And when he himself was afraid, he would call her to sing So I love this song. I'm sad we can't be together, crossing arms and swaying and singing it. Feel free to sing along as you watch.
I will sing on mute. Thank you.
Lowry, I think your son just said he's having problems with his computer.
Oh, okay. I can do it. I can share my screen. Thank you, Mackenzie. So, and you guys might not know, we have a YouTube channel and we put together a playlist for Martin Luther King Day. So this is on there, and so is a bunch of
Let's
other.
Talk about Grammarly. Anytime you.
Hang on. Shoot.
Always the ads.
Yeah.
So are a bunch of other great videos that you could watch about Dr. King. Okay.
And also some of our past.
Here it is. Now I got to go back here and screen share. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Today we're going to learn about the civil rights leader, Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther
Oh, I've
King
got too
Jr.,
many videos
best
playing at
known for
once.
his
MJ, you
nonviolent
said
speeches calling for equality for all people, was born on January 15th, 19.
He needs to be co-host.
I
The
tried.
world of Zoom. You got it, Larry?
I got it.
Okay.
She's got it, buddy.
Oh my goodness. Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. We'll get it fixed. Danita, you go ahead with our 3 awesome first guests.
Okay. So as I introduced earlier, we're gonna start with Mrs. Roz Pellis, who I've just outed her. She is my closet mentor. I've watched her in many meetings prior to even becoming a part of Poor People's Campaign, and even afterwards. And I just want to say, whenever her book comes out, please buy it. There's a story in there that is, it's an emotional. I'm not sure if she'll share it, but yeah, it's something for the times. It circles back to, what people have endured in the past and what we're currently enduring now. And then we have Mr. David Tyson, who's the former RSD trustee for Richardson. And then we will round it out with Chris Utley from Be the Bridge. Ms. Roz? You're muted, Ms. Roz.
I'm going to take myself off mute and then I'll get started. I am so honored to be here with Moms Against Racism and More at Lake Highlands in this forum that really honors Dr. King and also examines his life and his work and his lessons that we can use today. This forum is probably the very best way to celebrate his birthday. I want to offer thanks to the organizers of tonight, and especially thank Danita, who is my co-conspirator building social justice movement in the country at the Poor People's Campaign. So I especially am thankful to be involved and invited, and look forward to this discussion as we go on tonight. But this evening in particular, we gather to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And we are also asked to consider what Dr. King would think about this moment and what are the lessons that we can garner from his work and his words. And that's why this forum is so important. So as we think about Dr. King, we really need to first remember who he was. And today, this is not easy. As the years have passed, there have been efforts to really rewrite history and to sanitize his image. We are bombarded with images like those in McDonald's commercials and Coca-Cola commercials that only show us Dr. King, the dreamer. We have been flooded with sanitized images, images showing him with outstretched hands and always dreaming of a better day. We are constantly asked to remember his words at the March on Washington, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial that day, when he imagined that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners would come together at a table of brotherhood. We're asked to recall him wishing for the day that his 4 little children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And we were reminded that he said he wished for the day when we'd be able to all come together and form a beautiful symphony and get rid of the discord. And these were, in fact, great words. And those of us who were present that day were inspired and we agreed with him. And yet there was so much more on that day. As a teenage girl in that crowd on that hot day in August 1963, I remember other words. We don't hear the words in the commercials. I heard him say that Black folks had come to Washington, D.C. to cash a check backed by the promises of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, a check that promised life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. He went on to say that we had come to D.C. to declare that those promises were not fulfilled, and that the check had been sent back marked insufficient funds. I remember him also saying that now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. Dr. King can really not be just remembered as a dreamer. The speech on that August day was a call to action. In fact, Dr. King's original title of that famous speech was actually Normalcy, Never Again. It was the totality of the speech that day that I took back to me to North Carolina and that guided my work then in the Congress of Racial Equality and continues to be a touchstone for me today. So reclaiming the work and the life and the words of Dr. King is an imperative. So who really was Dr. King? A visionary, a preacher, an agitator, a troublemaker, a good troublemaker, a champion of nonviolence, and a truth teller. He stepped up as a very young preacher and joined hands with Rosa Parks to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. He founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and took on issues of discrimination in transportation and voting rights. In cities all over the South and in the country, Dr. King was jailed over and over again for standing against unjust laws in the Jim Crow era. Dr. King led the marches across the Edmund Pettus Bridge from Selma to Montgomery that ultimately led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. He stood with and supported SNCC. He brought a moral understanding to the movements for civil rights and for human rights. He spoke out against unjust wars, especially the war in Vietnam. He defended workers' rights. He counseled us to build a beloved community. He spoke about the nature of capitalism. He was a champion and advocate for the poor, and he brought together people of all races together to fight against poverty and racism and militarism. So Dr. King was much more than a dreamer. And so if ever there was a time to remember, to learn from, and to embrace Dr. King, this is that time. We are in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic that has taken the lives of over 400,000 folks. There's an economic crisis that has sent millions into the ranks of the unemployed and the poor. Over 140 million people are poor and low income in this country. We have food lines that mirror those of the Great Depression. There's a national reckoning over white supremacy and racist violence, and voter suppression is on the rise in this country. In fact, we have fewer voting rights today than we had when the Civil Rights Act was passed and immediately after that. And then finally, what we're all living with and trying to understand, there's been a frontal attack on US democracy in the form of an attempted coup in our nation's capital. So this is the state of the country today. And so one of the questions that's being asked all over the country today and over this weekend is, what would Dr. King say and think about these times if he were still with us? So we could only imagine that Dr. King would be shocked to hear the statistics about the pandemic, especially in a country that boasts of unparalleled scientific and medical advancements. He would speak out against an economic system that never addresses the poverty in this country, while it supports and props up the 1% that controls the wealth and privilege in this country. He would recall the demand that he made in 1963 for a new minimum wage. He was asking then for a living wage that would make it possible for people to live a decent life. He would remind us that everybody has a right to live. I also imagine that he would ask us to recall all the lives lost seeking the right to vote and that made possible the Voting Rights Act. And he would ask, where are the voices and actions of those who represent us in the Congress and in the halls of the various state houses? He would remind us that silence is betrayal. And he would also be horrified by the racism and racist violence. He would be alarmed that the evils, racism, poverty, militarism he identified over 50 years ago continue to be the evils of today. And he would be alarmed about the direct assault on what is thought to be the greatest democracy in the world. But he might also say, in some ways, he is not totally surprised, since the system that this country was founded on has not fundamentally changed to address these long-standing ills. And he would say more. Dr. King reminded us that many of today's issues are not new ones. He would tell us that though many of us are tired, that change does not come in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle, ongoing struggle. We could imagine these to be some of Dr. King's thoughts today. However, the most important question for us, given what's happening in the country, is what lessons we can learn from Dr. King and the movement, and how would they inform our work today? We could benefit from these lessons. I want to take a minute to just mention a few of those lessons that guide my work today. And I've been doing this work for about 5 decades, and his words still motivate me and guide me as I do my work every day. And so first is a lesson of courage, not a false courage, not a reckless courage, but a courage that is often demanded by movement building. He taught us to have the courage to speak out and to act. And also the willingness to take risk. Every action is not one that's been taken before. Sometimes, and some things require new tactics, and sometimes even a shift in strategy. As we saw in the infamous Children's March that Dr. King and SCLC led, that recognized the need for a new tactic and was willing to take a risk on it. I have also learned to stand on principle, to stand for what is right, even when it's not popular, as he did when he stood in that pulpit at Riverside Church in New York and denounced the war in Vietnam. This was not a popular view, but it was right in that moment. And he taught us to be prepared to lead, to study and analyze what's happening and engage and act as he did in Birmingham when he was called upon to lead the bus boycott. He didn't set out to lead that boycott. He was called to us and called to it. He was able to rise to the occasion. He also taught us that he and his lesson, this is his work and others. Dr. King did not build a singular movement, but he taught us with others in his great movement that no person, no one group could singularly bring about the kind of fundamental change that we need in this country. He taught and demonstrated that it will take all of us across all lines of diversity, all of us who believe in freedom and justice. We all needed to come together to make the change that's necessary. And looking back, we can see that systemic issues of oppression and racism cannot be resolved one by one, not one at a time. He taught, and the movement taught, about the intersectionality of issues, which then provides a roadmap for their resolution. And oddly enough, I learned about the role of humor. He showed, and folks in that movement showed, that movements require us to bring our whole selves to the table, our whole selves to movements. That movements can be joyous with song and laughter and fellowship. He is reported to have had a wicked sense of humor that got many people through many rough and tough days. So these are the lessons that I carry with me. There are many, many more, and I urge each of us to examine those lessons for ourselves. Finally, these are the words of Dr. King that guide my work even now. And I want to put them out. He said, in a time of great threat and uncertainty, nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point. We've got to see it through. He also said that even in this dark moment, we've got to give ourselves to the struggle until the end. I've tried to do that, and so many here have also tried to do that. So we find ourselves in a dark moment right now. And Dr. King's work and the work of that movement and the lessons of that movement can bring us light. So we must continue our struggle for justice, because I believe we can win. History is on our side. I believe we can win. And in the spirit of Dr. King, we must go forward together and not one step back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Roz. That was inspiring, to say the least. Thank you so much. To hear those words and to hear someone that experienced them firsthand, that's an awesome experience to share. Storytelling is, as my grandmother would say, is our way of keeping history alive. And so I thank you for that. Any questions that you may have for Ms. Roz, please put them in the chat. We're going to have 2 other people speak, and then we'll go into our first question segment. So if you have a question and you don't want to lose focus, just drop it in the chat. And next we'll hear from Mr. David Tyson. Mr. Tyson.
I want to echo thank yous to the organization for putting this on. This is a powerful message in this day and time as we now celebrate the heavenly birthday of the 92nd heavenly birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. While I never had the opportunity to meet Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I feel that I've always had an intimate connection with him, because I know a number of the people that he engaged with. I am originally from Shreveport, Louisiana, just east of here on I-20. And we had some difficult times when I was growing up in Shreveport, Louisiana. I am a baby boomer. So as a result of being a baby boomer, I was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s, became a young adult in the 70s, and now I'm a senior citizen. So the question that has really been poised is, what would Dr. King do, in today's time? And so I chose to answer the question in terms of what Dr. King would do as it relates to violence, rioting in our cities and in our nation. So I go back to a 60 Minutes interview that took place on September 27th, 1966. Interestingly enough, the interview was done by Mike Wallace. You may know his son. In that interview, a number of things took place, such as, why is it that African Americans, or let me rephrase that, this was 1966. The question was, why is it that Negroes can't get ahead? Dr. King answered that question profoundly with, Negroes are the only group of people that came to this country enslaved. And so we were evaluated based on the color of our skin, not the content of our character. And so the other question that Mike Wallace posed, of course, is, there's violence in the streets across the country. There had been Watts, there had been Detroit, of course, there had been Chicago. In fact, in 1966, I was a teenager, and I just happened to have been in Chicago the summer of 1966 because of the death of my great aunt, and I was there for her funeral. And while I was there, on the west side of Chicago, they were turning over police cars, robbing the A&P food stores, and it was constant mayhem that I witnessed as a young teenager. So that question is a question that I think Dr. King, his relevant answer, of course, at that time in 1966, and there were interviews in 1967 and interviews in 1968. About 11 months before he died, where NBC also did a 40-minute interview, and I posted that to YouTube. I posted that to the Lake Highlands Area Moms Against Racism's website, Facebook page. So you might want to look at that. But he continuously talks about the fact that he believes that nonviolence, still, the nonviolent movement is the way to get ahead. So, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other things because, I want to share my personal experiences because I've had some personal experiences in both areas. So like most young people, we came to know Dr. Martin Luther King as children during my era as a baby boomer, but we also saw things that were happening on television. As a 9-year-old in 1963 in Shreveport, Louisiana, I heard about a situation involving a family friend. His name was Dr. Brady Blake. And Dr. Blake was a Baptist preacher, young Baptist preacher, that right after the March on Washington in August of 1963 decided that Shreveport was going to have their March on Shreveport. Well, it was not to happen because the Italian white police commissioner, George Dortois, said no. And they went ahead with the march in Shreveport anyway. But what happened that evening at Little Union Baptist Church on the corner of Milam and Norma Street was George Dortois decided to ride his horse into Little Union Baptist Church, beat Reverend Blade almost to his death, and then left him there basically lifeless. As a 9-year-old in 1963, that church was next door to some very good church member friends of ours. and we were able to see the aftermath. Dr. Blade survived it. They didn't take him to the hospital in Shreveport. The name of the hospital in Shreveport that was considered the trauma center of that time, Dr. Williams, was Confederate Memorial Hospital. Today, we know it as LSU Medical Center. That's real. And so, so that was my first real close and personal ideas of what was happening and the types of things that were happening in terms of injustice and what Dr. King was about doing, not only in Alabama and Mississippi, but he was doing it throughout the southern states of America during that time. This is 1963, post-March on Washington. And then let me fast forward to 1968. In 1968, I am a teenager. And I was a member of I think they called it at that time, and they probably still do, the youth group of the NAACP. And so we decided to do a protest and a boycott because Negroes during that time, and even to this day, bought a lot of music, especially during the Motown era. So this Motown era included records that you may have heard of called 45s and LPs. And the guy who had control of the 45s and the LPs was a white Italian by the name of we called him Stan the Man. Stan the Man loved to sell his 45s and LPs to Negroes, but he wouldn't hire us. So we started a nonviolent protest under the auspices of the nonviolent movement. By the end of the summer, Stan the Man gave up, and he actually started hiring Negroes because he knew his business was doomed if he did not. So we're talking about here, was it the color of the skin, or was it economics? You know, I think we have to draw some parodies associated with that. And then I want to move forward just a few more years, and now I'm a sophomore student in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at the campus of Southern University, Baton Rouge. And we were involved in non-violent student unrest associated with some disagreements we had with our university and some of the other issues associated with getting the type of education that we were not getting in relationship to the guys across town at the university, LSU. So on November 16th, 1972, a number of students decided that they were going to conduct a sit-in in the president's office. I was not involved in the sit-in, but a young lady that I have gotten to know very well, who happens to be my wife, and she was not at that time. Of course, I had just recently met her. She was a part of that sit-in. I was one of the guys that was outside, and in fact, I was actually in my dorm that day. But when we realized that there was student unrest actually taking place, myself and a roommate, we collected ourselves and started heading over to where the student unrest was taking place. Abruptly, we were stopped with the sound and the smell of gunshots and tear gas. Within a matter of 15 minutes, two young Black men known by the names of Smith and Brown were murdered. They were shot in the head by East Baton Rouge Parish police deputies. Claimingly, they were firing tear gas. If you've never smelled tear gas before, it doesn't smell good. So these were peaceful protests. In this case, it turned violent, and because of that violence that was perpetuated on us by peace officers, and let me tell you something else that happened very quickly. The National Guard showed up, within 30 minutes. But violence did take place. Rioting and looting took place on the campus. Students were upset. So Dr. King's answer, of course, is a riot is the language of the unheard. A riot is the language of the unheard. I believe that in 2020, 2021, Dr. King, at the age of 92, would still say that the nonviolent movement is the way to get ahead. But I say this because I want young people to hear this. In 1972, I was that young person, the age of 19. In 1968, I was that young person. I was 15 years of age at that time. So young people have always guided this movement of parity, of equality in our country, not just in America, but in the world as we know it. Dr. King, unfortunately, as much as he believed in nonviolence, was murdered. He was killed by violence. In fact, the majority of our leaders of that era were killed by violence. You know, Malcolm X, as you kind of go back and you look at what happened, I forgot the brother's name, in Mississippi that were killed by violence right in front of their children, Medgar Evers, of course, Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy, you know, just to name a few, along with all of the women, white women that were involved in Mississippi during that time, and white preachers, Protestants and Jews were involved in nonviolent protests. However, they were all killed under the auspices of nonviolence. So we live in a country that is built on violence. Obviously, we just witnessed the most violent situation that's ever happened in this country since the War of 1812, when you had people come into the Capitol to murder our Speaker of the House, to murder our Vice President of the United States of America. So let's keep in mind that Dr. King was a minister, a peaceful man, but violence is perpetuated upon this country because that is the way of America.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tyson, for that journey through your childhood into your young adulthood. And again, as I said before, storytelling is a must to keep our history alive, whether it's good or bad. We have to be able to share these stories with our children. They need to be able to share these stories with their children, because we have to, and I don't want to sound cliche, keep the dream alive. We have to, and storytelling is the way that we do this. And I want to thank you, Mr. Tyson. And for the first part of our segment, we're Mr. Utley of Be the Bridge. And so now I turn it over to you, Mr. Utley.
Thank you very much, Danita and Larry. Pleasure to be on this particular call. Just a brief introduction about who I am and what I do. I am a portion of one of the few members of another group called North Texas Allies. And we have adopted Latasha Morrison's Be the Bridge book/curriculum/program as our primary teaching tool in their mission, in their ongoing mission towards racial reconciliation and unity amongst whites to Black, Indigenous, and all persons of color. I've been doing this work since it's really only been a short time, about June 2020, but the blessings of God and the favor of God have been upon me to where we've been able to grow by leaps and bounds, not as much as LHAMAR has, but we've done our own work in gathering folks together across multiracial, multi-ethnic environments to have these hard and difficult conversations to address the spirits of historical, systemic, and individual racism. And we continue to press on and do that work through Zoom-based small groups in which we're able to gather folks, not just from the immediate area, but across Texas, across the United States, And we even have connections overseas to where folks have been able to come in and join these conversations. And they have been very, very rich and fulfilling. And it's a pleasure to do that. And in that work, what we're doing is we are fulfilling Dr. King's, one of his dreams, in which he stated, of course, that he would like to see all men have a seat at the table of brotherhood. And in order to have that seat at that table, there's a lot of work that we as African Americans must do to allow those white brothers and sisters who have that heart and who have that mustard seed of faith to really step into these hard conversations, because they're really, really, really hard conversations once you start to unpack all of these things, you know, the white fragility, white privilege, and then all of those sorts of things. There is defense, of course. Some hearts just are not ready to really take that in. But for those hearts who are willing, we offer them through our work at North Texas Allies and the Be the Bridge curriculum, the ability to sit down and to have these rough and difficult yet meaningful and powerful conversations over the course of a 9 to 12 week Zoom based small group. And as I said, it's great, great work. And I just want to offer very, very briefly for those of us who are African Americans, what my experiences have been in bringing in our white brothers and sisters into this whole topic and conversation of bridge building. And there are just three things that I would like to share, if you will indulge me. One of the things that you have to bring into the table is grace. Our white brothers and sisters who enter these conversations are in desperate, desperate need of grace. One of the things that we see all the time is that they come into these environments, they have a heart to want to know and to want to understand. They've heard all the stories, they've heard the rhetoric from both sides. If you're listening to CNN, if you're listening to Fox News, if you're listening, no matter where you're hearing, they're seeing it all. The Black Lives Matter, the protests, they're seeing it, and they're coming in hungry with answers, and they want to know. And the reality is we have to show them grace because they don't know. They read books, yes, they do. They do their research, yes, they do. And not to discount reading or anything like that, but there's something that we offer as African Americans with our collective years of boots on the ground experiences of living in this skin and walking this walk, just as Ms. Rise and Mr. Tyson has shared. That knowledge, that tribal knowledge and experience is valuable to those particular folks. And so we have to humbly allow them to have the grace to ask their questions and to give honest answers with humility and to withhold judgment, to hold back that provocation of snap judgment of, well, we've been telling you this stuff for years. Well, you should have already been knowing, you know, go read a book, go study Dr. King, go study this person, go study that person. They're coming to us humbly because they really want to know. And we got to offer them that grace and that mercy that God imparts in us so that they would know and that they would understand. It's going to take hand holding. It's going to take hand holding. And what I like to do is I like to pride myself as not being heavy on that snap judgment, anger, and provocation because they don't know, because they have a million questions. And so I think it's a good thing to walk with them step by step, hand in hand, moment by moment, to where we can be an open book and to peel open the backstage pass and to share the backstories of our experiences. Because without that, how else will they learn? How else will they know? And how else will they grow? Now, having said that, we have to be discerning and we have to understand that we got to take the time to really start vetting, being prayerful, and being mindful of who we walk with before we decide to take this journey with them. Because one thing that we've learned, that every ally ain't an ally. There are some, unfortunately, on these other sides who do come in holding and harboring their views and their point of views that would dare to say that racism is not really a thing. Why are you complaining? Why are you always, you mean, if we could just get you guys economically sound, that's what you need instead of always crying about these issues. And so when they come into these environments and they're standing on those points, they may come in the guise and appearance of saying, I am an ally and I want to partner with you. But at the end of the day, they want to disrupt. They want to challenge. They want to throw salt on the game, so to speak, as if to disrupt the work that's going on. And so you have to be mindful before you start walking people down this road of who they are. And they'll give stuff away. They'll say stuff like, I know this stuff is real. I'm just tired of hearing it all the time. They'll also point narratives as if to say that the problem with racism is really more on us as African Americans, us holding grudges and us carrying our pain and so on and so forth, and we just won't let it go. As soon as we see that, and as soon as you see that, it's okay to hit the ejector seat to say, you know what, your heart might not be ready. You may not be in the place to really take this journey, and it's okay. Go ahead and do your work and do your research and do what you have to do. And whenever your heart is changed, I'm ready to walk with you. But at the end of the day, you can't change a heart that's fixed and unwilling to be moved. You absolutely cannot change a heart that won't be moved. But once you have that trust that's been established with those people who are pure in heart, who want to partner with us, we got to let them in. Historically, as African Americans, of course, we hold things back. We don't want sabotage. I mean, listening to the point that I just made, we don't want sabotage. We don't want to get backstabbed. We don't want to have these infiltrators come and use these information against us. But at the end of the day, there's good people. There's good men. There's good women who want to partner with us. They do want to ally with us. They want to hear the experiences. They want to hear the stories that Ms. Rise has, Mr. Tyson has, and all the different African Americans and other people of color on this call. They're all great stories, and they all need to be heard, and they want to hear them. And we have to be brave enough to let them in to our hearts and into our minds and to share those stories. We do those principles, we can build these bridges, and we can have the day. And we're all sitting together at that table of brotherhood, just as Dr. King dreamt and has prayed for. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing your wisdom and your guidance as far as being the bridge, and what you've experienced are the best avenues to bring in our allies. When we first started this group, the first thing I said to people were, you're gonna be uncomfortable. And it's okay to be uncomfortable. You're taking on something that you've never experienced, and you're gonna have to peel back the layers of your soul in order to understand what happens to my soul. And so we've prided ourselves in meeting people where they are, not forcing people to be at this level of understanding of their privilege, but just meeting them where they are and helping them take baby steps. So I want to thank you for that. So we're going to start this first section, and please be with us. It's a lot that we have unpacked. And as I'm looking at my time, we'll probably be like 8:40-ish, and we're not going to go past that. So please, we're going to try to make up a little ground. So Mackenzie, if you have a question, and I think there was a question the first question came from Mr. Tyson. And I think Mr. Tyson wanted to address that question to Ms. Roz. Do you have that question, Mackenzie?
Yes. So the first question from Mr. Tyson was Dr. King killed because of his race or his issues with economic development of Black folks in the Vietnam War?
So I think that's a great question. And I think it's important as we try to understand the course of social movements in the country. I believe that Dr. King, in the eyes of folks who wanted to have a different kind of country, I believe that folks believed he had stepped over the line, that he had gone beyond being what people could tolerate as a civil rights leader, but a person who'd moved to another level, a human rights leader, who was talking about the system that we live in. If you read the later years of Dr. King, the radical King is what he's often referred to in his latter years. There's a whole different understanding that Dr. King is bringing to the table. And it includes racism. It includes all those things that have been fought for, but it puts it in a larger context. And I believe that once it got put in that framework, that Dr. King became a threat beyond the threat that he had been. And I think Dr. King understood that, and he stepped out. That's part of that, being willing to take a stand and take a risk. And when he stood up in that pulpit, first talking about Vietnam, that was when people really started to go after him. And then he started talking about the system that we live under, that is set up so that people of color and others cannot survive and thrive in a way that we all should be able to in a country this rich. So I believe that, of course, his struggle around race and the color of his skin was a place where people started. I honestly think that it was more than that. It was the political position he had taken that ended up in an assassination. And I believe that throughout history that we can trace that kind of politics to assassinations. So, so that's kind of my view on that.
Thank you for that. So another question that we got in the chat was from Yvette, and her question is, what actions by white allies are most helpful? Maybe Mr. Tyson and Mr. Utley, maybe you guys could each give us like one or two things that you think are most helpful.
What was the question?
What actions by white allies are most helpful?
Well, that's a good one. Changing one's behavior takes time, as does changing one's attitude. They both take time. They all take time. So I would say, in terms, because you're asking about an action, which is a behavior, then I would say that what's helpful is to not ignore systematic racism. And the way that happens is, when you see something or you hear something, a lot of people are afraid to say something, that they just ignore it. So you have to stop ignoring it. You don't have to put yourself at risk when doing so, but you have to put your mind in a position and your behavior in such a way that you don't contribute to the systematic racism, what someone says, what someone does.
My answer to that would be one of the principles, well, 4 of the principles that I've learned from walking with the Be the Bridge team. Listen, learn, lament, and leverage. Listen to the outcries that we pour out. Learn as much as you can, the individual stories in the books and all of that. Lament with us. Feel the pain, feel the sorrow, feel the anguish, feel all of it. Don't judge, don't ask questions, don't what we call in anti-racism white-splain to try to play devil's advocate, so to speak. Just submit as we cry out. And then once you've done those three things, then partner with us to leverage to your own communities and your own brothers and sisters at work, at church, wherever, to get the message and to get these stories and information out to your fellow men. And we work those 4 L's, we'll be headed towards the road of change, I believe.
I love that, Chris. And together, side by side. So we just want you to know that we're here with you. We see you, we hear you. I think those are some of the best messages that white allies can give. And we hope that you, our Black brothers and sisters, feel that with our group. We're not going to have time to get to all the questions, but what I want to promise you is that we will revisit those in our Facebook group and keep those conversations going and help put you in touch with some people too. But out of respect of time for our guests and all of you, we want to move on to our next 4 awesome visitors. We have the Reverend Kathy Sweeney, who is Reverend at Arapahoe United Methodist Church. And I'm just interested, Kathy, in what is striking you these days. And you're someone who's also worked a lot with homeless families and empowering women with homeless children.
Yeah, so thank you, Larry. Thank you, Danita, for the invitation. I would be happy just to give up my panel time and just listen, because the stories are so critical to hear. But I do have a couple of things to share. As Lowry said, I'm a former assistant, in addition to being Lowry's pastor at Arapahoe United Methodist Church in Richardson. I have previous experience in the real estate industry, real estate development, real estate, just a number of economic development things. And in addition to a strong passion of mine that the social gospel calls us to be in community with each other and to lift each other up and to help in all ways, including systemic instances that continue to contribute to poverty and to other things. So as an assistant director of Agape Resource and Assistance Center, I was involved in particularly women and families who are victims of domestic violence. And it gives you a unique experience to just be in partnership with them, to hear their pain. What Mr. Utley was saying about listening and learning and lamenting with them. So when Lowry actually asked me if I'd like to participate, she said, just resonate a little bit on one of your favorite Martin Luther King quotes. And I immediately gravitated towards a quote that is often attributed to Dr. King, but actually he was quoting someone else. But it is so powerful that that it sounds so much like him. And that is that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So to clarify, that is a quote from Theodore Parker's writings from the mid-1850s. So it's a very, very long ago. He was a Unitarian minister, and Dr. King appropriately gave credit and put it in quotes, but he picked that up and made it a bit of a rallying cry that individuals continue to use now. And so when she asked me about that, I thought, okay, I want to resonate on that particular, that it bends, that the arc is long, but it bends towards justice. And just recently at our church, we had a sermon series titled Unmasked, the masks, and we take them off. And we were acknowledging various attitudes and feelings and actions that needed to be unmasked in our world. In this, how difficult it was. And here we are physically wearing masks. So one of those sermons, one of those Sundays, we focused on unmasking justice. And I was struck by our senior pastor's first point about problems that we may encounter when we try to unmask justice. And here's what he said. And really, I'm speaking now. Chris, you set this up pretty well, and some of these questions set it up pretty well, that I'm speaking mostly to my white siblings right now, that the greatest privilege is in unmasking justice, it's a privilege that we have, is the ability to move on from an exposed injustice. And the call of Jesus, who I follow, is to take a sustained look at injustice in a culture of sound bites. So let me share more. Speaking out and going back, speaking out about injustices and then going back to the routine of our lives, that's just not fully unmasking justice. Because unmasking justice is a long-term commitment. It's not just a retweet or a share on social media. Injustice is something that we will encounter over and over and over time again in our lives and beyond. The arc of the moral universe is long. It's not a one-time thing. I spoke about that recently in response to George Floyd's death in a racial reconciliation group that I am part of, known as Threaded. The response from those who were calling out the injustice of that incident kind of came to mind. And I was asked to share a short thought, devotional, however you want to refer to it, as part of a series of talks on lamenting. And I chose to reflect on the biblical story of Ruth in that devotional. And I wanted to share that with you today. The story of Ruth isn't just about Ruth. Ruth from the Hebrew Bible. She has her own book, which is nice. But the story of Ruth is not just about Ruth. The story begins with a famine that forced a man and his wife, Naomi, out of Judah and into Moab, which is currently Jordan. So they were in this strange land. And over time, they had two sons, and the sons married women named Orpah and Ruth. So these wives would be Moabites, because that's where they were living at the time. Ruth is one of those. Naomi is now her mother-in-law. And in a series of tragedies, Naomi's husband dies first, and then her two sons also die. So the women are left without husbands, which is not a good place to be. So Naomi decides to leave the land of Moab and return to Judah, where she was raised. And both of her daughters-in-law are initially willing to join her, but Naomi encourages them to stay in Moab so that they would have a better chance of finding husbands. Now, I could get off on a whole rabbit's trail about that, about how they have a better chance of finding husbands, a better life at the time, but let's get past that. Naomi didn't just say it once, she said it a few times. Go back, she says, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. See, there she goes again, this equation of a woman's value to a husband or anyone else. But I'm going to move on. Orpah takes Naomi's advice. She reaches over and she kisses her goodbye, and she returns home to Moab. But Ruth, on the other hand, is in this for the long haul. Here's what she says to Naomi in verses 16 and 17. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So Naomi had become Ruth's family, had become her mother. They had grown to love each other as mother and daughter. They had experienced grief together. They had laughed together. They had cried together. And Ruth had a choice. She could stay where she was comfortable and return home and likely marry someone, or she could stand by Naomi, journey to an unfamiliar place, be uncomfortable for a while, and continue to be in relationship with her, leading to other relationships as well until death. So Ruth is clear in her actions. And siblings, I want to say, especially white siblings here, we should be too. Again, speaking to the white siblings, are we unmasking justice when George Floyd is killed and then retreating back to the comfort of our own homes? What do we do then when Jacob Blake is shot and killed? Is Jacob Blake not also family? I'm saying to you, we too have a choice, and we can stay where we're comfortable, return home, and wait for the next incident of injustice only to pull out our phone and tweet again. Or we can stand by our siblings, our brothers and sisters of color, in perhaps an uncomfortable place for us, but that's okay, because we need to listen, we need to learn, we need to lament, and we need to leverage. We need to continue the journey together, just like Ruth and Naomi did. So I ask you, what's the action that we take here that says, your people will be my people and your God, my God? And I would submit to you that our action to unmask justice comes from our hearts and from a faith that truly believes that every person is a cherished child of God with dignity and expectation that we are all equal. It's in gathering together, sharing a meal, learning more about each other that we are going to form familial bonds. It's in the action of building community, a beloved community in which we can all walk without fear of each other and in which we can grow in love. It's a community that becomes family. So when we build a family, it's a whole lot harder to return to our comforts when our siblings are dying in the streets. When we build a family, a beloved community, privilege is no longer being comfortable. The greatest privilege is in the honor to stand with each other until the beloved community is complete. So to put it in the context of Martin Luther King, it takes a family, people bonded together in the long term, to bend that arc towards justice together in the long term. It doesn't take us being in moderation. It takes everyone's strength and fortitude and assurance that justice is not just the moral necessity, but also the righteous one that binds us all together as equal children of God.
I love that, Kathy. Thank you so much. That was
you're welcome.
Beautiful. And we have to bend it together, and that we are here as a family and beloved community, and we are not going to leave you stranded and alone. White allies, we are going to be there with you, our Black and brown brothers and sisters. I love that. Leon, I see you down there. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to go next to Reverend Titus Brown, who is from our neighborhood church, North Highlands Bible Church. And Titus, I love that you're the pastor of families there, because that just reminds us the things we're talking about are not above the heads of children. They're so important to talk about with children too, and families. Thank you for being here, Titus. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, again, thank you for having me, and I'll try to be quick. And thank you for Reverend Cap. That was beautiful. I think you stole a lot of my thunder, and I'm glad you did. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
No, don't be. You that was great. Okay, I'm gonna start off by telling two short stories of my life experiences. Right. Let's start when I was around 18 years old, and I'm from Alabama. I'm from Pritchard, Alabama. That's the southern part of Alabama, and I was in school in Huntsville, Alabama A&M. And so it's time for us to go home for a summer break, and I'm on my way home with some friends. I catch a ride, and our car breaks down. Really, it only does like 20 miles an hour, and on a highway, that's too slow. So we're these three big guys in this little bit of car trying to make it home with all of our luggage and everything for the summer. And the car breaks down, and we stop in this small town. And we go to a gas station, which is a full service gas station. And the guy tells us, hey, no, you guys can't stop here, keep going. And we go to another full service gas station. The guy says, hey, no, you can't stop here, keep going. So one of the guys who owns the car, he calls his dad. And his dad had AAA. And AAA gets us a person out there to bring us another car, a rental car. And the lady who brought the rental car was this little white lady. And she was so nice. And she explained to us why we were getting moved down to full service gas station. It was because we were Black. Now, I didn't realize that at the time because, you know, as a young man, I'm thinking the civil rights movement was so many years ago. And it's, hey, it doesn't affect me now. Yes, it does. Okay, so when she gets us a ride in her car, this is a little white lady. When she first sees us, she says, I'm glad I came when I did, because if it was dark and they saw you here, you would have been in trouble, right? That was my first experience with racism and the fact that I kind of knew that I couldn't go where I wanted to go in these United States of America. Fast forward, I'm in the military and I'm driving home at night. Get pulled over by the police who says they smell marijuana in my car. Difference is, I don't smoke marijuana. So why would you smell with marijuana in my car, especially if I'm in the car with my window rolled up and you're in the car with your window rolled up? Where did this marijuana smell come from? It didn't. I mean, it come from my black skin, I guess, because I was pulled over because I was black again. And I realized time after time that there's places in these United States that I'm not legally allowed to go because people are infringing upon my rights. So today, I want to talk to you as a pastor and the church's responsibility to racism. And I want to do that in the lens of that Dr. King is also a pastor, and his response to the clergy who responded to him during the Birmingham bus boycott. So first I want to start off by saying that as a pastor, Jesus is the role model, and we are called to bring every person into the realization that Jesus is Lord, right? That's the first thing as a pastor. Dr. Martin Luther King was a pastor, and that's his first responsibility. And he's going to use that responsibility, and he's going to bring forth the Bible to call clergy into accountability of their actions. We stand for what's right, and pastors do not quit no matter how hard the times are. We don't quit. We can't give up because we have a bigger responsibility in light of heaven and the eternal kingdom to come. Our goal is to pull more people from this kingdom and get them to the next kingdom as we possibly can. That's the goal. That's a pastor. We don't quit. Dr. King is a pastor. Dr. King write his letters in response to a clergy calling his actions unwise and untimely. Now, they're telling him that this is neither the right time nor the right way for you to conduct yourself in light of what's going on around you. Okay, so let's talk about, well, what's going on around them, right? You have social injustice, and injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And the problem is, we like to make this a black or white thing. No, this is an American thing, right? I hate the fact that we kind of have a Black History Month, right? It's an American History Month, right? It affects us all, okay? And so the threat of injustice affects us all, and the responsibility of every citizen of the United States is to act. Okay, so now I want to talk about, you know, when the clergy was saying it's not the right time. Now, the effects of what is happening in Birmingham is that we have segregation, brutality, unjust treatment in the courts, and bombing of Black churches, right? They didn't feel as if it's a right time, right? So when will it ever be a right time? And I just want us to ask ourselves that today, because this is some of the things I run into when I talk to other people about injustice, right? Especially when I'm just gonna chime in here for a minute, the kneeling during the football game. Kneeling during the football game does not constitute to me you being offended when people are dying. Pick another reason to be offended. That's what I'm saying. All right, let me keep going, and then I'll get back on my soapbox. Okay, ideally we should choose to negotiate. Ideally he would choose to negotiate, but he said there's no time to negotiate. We did that, and when we negotiated, we only been pushed back further, and people are still dying. People are still experiencing this social injustice. So it's time for our actions to be direct. It's time for us to start boycotting. It's time for us to move through non-violent means, right? In preparations for their non-violent means, get this, they had to teach protesters how to protest non-violently. This blew my mind because my mom always told me, if somebody hit you, hit them back, right? And if you can, knock them out. That's Christine Brown, all right? Dr. King's, on the other hand, he's saying, if you take the blow, don't retaliate. If you take the blow, don't retaliate. And to find out that this man is very military minded, right? He knows the area around him. Not that, you know, we're going to win this thing by mass numbers. We're going to win this thing on the appeal of our humanity, that we deserve these rights, right? You don't necessarily have to fight for them in a way that's violent. You fight for them in a way that's peace, so you can let people see your humanity and that these actions are wrong, and let people step in, Americans who care, step in on your behalf. Okay, so that was the appeal. And he thought tension, get this, was a good thing. Tension was a good thing. And the tension, you would think, was a good thing for the people who would benefit from it in us receiving these inalienable rights, right? No, we're just not the ones who are going to benefit from it. It's also from the oppressor, because with this tension, it's going to relieve him of his hate. That's wise to me, right? We don't leave people in the situation that we found them, right? And so the quote that me and my wife have in our house, right, is, don't hate a man so much that he brings you so low that you hate him, right? Don't let a man bring you so low that you hate him. That's Dr. King, right? He understood that these people are made in the image of God and they're worthy of salvation. Not that we are better than anybody, but not that anybody else is better than us. It was equality. That's all that they were asking for. Okay, Dr. King explained how freedom was never voluntarily given by the oppressor, but demanded by the oppressed, right? It was something that we had to work for. It's something that we had to ask for, but not just us alone, right? Don't think that it's going to be a certain time when these rights are going to be given to us. Because I think that's what people in the church think today, that automatically, if you guys just wait long enough, you're going to be heard. I was 8 years old after Dr. King was assassinated, right? And it's still places in Alabama that I can't go at night, right? I want you guys to think about that. It's still places, even here in Texas, that I can't go at night. And you want me to wait, right? I am so fearful of being pulled over by the police with my sons in the car and making a mistake. And I am called to wait for justice, right? I just want you to think about that, right? Because that's not justice for all, right? Justice for all means that I can go where I want to go and do what I want to do if I'm not breaking the law. I worry so much about my sons playing in the back seat with a toy Nerf gun. I had an argument with my little boy who's 5 years old. Well, he was 5 years old at the time. I said, man, you can't do that in the car, because if we get pulled over and something happens, it's on us. Yes, we have those conversations with our kids. All right. As it relates to calling the movement, Dr. King says that justice too long delayed is justice denied. The church needs to hear that, right? Because I don't think that we automatically think that, you know, justice is gonna come one day. And so it's okay if I have my rights, but I want your rights to be put on hold. And I had conversations with people about this, and I hope that they're listening right now, because I just want to be just totally honest, so that, you know, you can see what it feels like to live in this skin, right? Okay, let's keep going, right? The greatest stumbling block to the Negro's stride toward freedom is the white moderate who is more devoted to order than justice. I feel like that's true. But I also feel that if the shoe was on the other foot, and I can take with me, my experiences, I would not want you to feel this way. And if I call you my brother, and if I call you my sister, if it bothers you, it bothers me, right? That's it. This is what we're called to. And I know we're pressed for time, but I want to give you, what do you think the church should do or should know, according to me, right? Social justice starts with seeing people as created in the image of God, no lesser than, no greater than each other. We all have a voice, so let's listen. Let's listen. I think far too often, my experience with other believers is it's not real, right? You're making this up. In a sense, they won't tell you that, but that's where the conversation normally goes, right? No, it's real. And I'm afraid of it for my kids, right? In the next generation. Matthew 6:10, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We want what is done is in heaven here on earth now. And that's no oppression, no sneaky segregation, no supremacy, no wrongful death, and we want the right to stand for what is right. I don't think that that's a hard ask, but many people will think that it is. Okay, and finally, Galatians chapter 5, verse 14. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love, 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 right? I can't tell you how I don't want to hold not one grudge with nothing that happened to me in my life, with anybody, right? I want to love people because just as Christ loved me, that's how I'm called to love all of you. That's how I'm called to change my view of anybody who oppressed me. Love, 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 because love wins, right? And so in echoing that, I just think that as church members, learn to hear what your brothers and sisters are saying, and let's turn the news off. I think so many times we look at the news to be our barometer of right and wrong, right? No, let God do that for you, okay? And let's make sure that if it's important to them, it needs to be important to you, because that's how true change is truly going to happen. I don't think it's just going to start with a bunch of people who don't have a set of beliefs in the ultimate God. That's not going to happen, right? Because in this world, hey, we do what's right according to what we feel, right? So my appeal here today is for those of you who follow Christ, right? And that was Martin Luther's appeal too. He gave many illustrations of the Bible, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Being in the situation that they're in, right? He talked about Paul and Paul's situation, right? And how he appealed to the courts in Rome. He used everything he could in order to tell people about Christ Jesus. And also he talked about Jesus and how Jesus loved, right? So let's remember that the ultimate goal is that we don't submit to this form of, if it doesn't apply to me, then it's not real. We have to stop that. And we really have to listen to what people are saying in order to really understand what they're going through. Thank you.
Amen. Can we get an amen? Okay, you come back and preach anytime, Reverend Brown. But love your neighbor as yourself. That's what it's all about. And I want to just say for the record, we are not colorblind. That's one of the arguments I think you've heard some nice white people say. I don't see color. That's what the guy coming up to me today said at our Say Their Names. We are color kind, and I want you to learn that concept. It's the concept of I see color. I'm going to recognize that that color means something to you. It gives you a unique experience, history, challenges that are yours because that color is a part of you, just as my color is a part of me. So the term you can start using with your children and your students, color kindness, instead of color blindness, because we do see color. That's the truth. And we've got 2 more awesome speakers. Thanks for hanging in with us. Mr. Watson is a wonderful, amazing teacher here in RASD. And he's done some bias training with our own group and with the teens in our group. And then we're gonna have Dr. Brian Williams after that. So Mr. Watson, I'm gonna ask to unmute you. You're on.
Hi, and thanks for hosting this, Lowry and Danita. So Dr. King, one of the quotes when Lowry first came up to me and asked if I'd participate was we started talking about it, the Dr. King quote on what education means. And he says, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that's the goal of true education. And so in light of that, and why I agreed to do this is, what might Dr. King think about if he were to walk into a classroom today and see what's going on? And I can only speak for a school in Richardson, but I'm sure that this applies to many schools around the United States. And I think the fundamental question is, how do we create an environment that dismantles and rather than enables and benefits from white supremacy in a colorist point of view? I think if he walked into one of our classrooms, he'd be very happy that he saw people of color, Black, brown children receiving a similar education, but I think he would also see a true problem in that our students don't engage civically. And that's our goal, that we have to have our students engage civically. And I think as some of the other speakers were speaking before me said, when did we learn how to do these things? And we have a bunch of problems, and unfortunately we have more problems than we have solutions. And these were some of the things that I see in the school that I think Dr. King would immediately see and notice as a problem and potentially give similar solutions. Number one, the curriculum is disjointed at the high school level. We do not have a way to have all 9th graders, all 10th graders, all 11th graders learning towards the same goal. Leadership is, while understandably concerned due to very vocal parent groups, they're tepid, and we cannot have that. If we want to really dismantle and give equality and equity to all of our students. And that when we talk about building character, it's often tied to the dominant culture, and it isn't inclusive of the multiracial nation and multiracial society that we do have. Whether we acknowledge that, obviously not, but we do have a multiracial society. I will say that he would see that there are quite a few teachers that do engage in dismantling the supremacist views, and not just racially, but also within the LGBTQI community, language, and ableist views as well. Unfortunately, there are pushbacks. Anytime there is training, teachers don't want to go to it. They don't want to acknowledge that there is disproportionate outcomes. There are systems in place, like for instance at our own district, where we're not allowed to have political slogans, including Black Lives Matter, on our masks. Not allowed to have those flags. We have a system in place where pre-AP and AP students, those advanced level courses, are often just a way to segregate students of color away from white students, or the home kids versus the apartment kids. We have tepid acknowledgement of LGBTQ in our community. We have community pushback at board meetings that threaten to take away funding or threaten to vote out certain members. And of course, just personally, we have lost and dropped the ball on making sure that students know about reputable sources, and we've allowed our students to become radicalized. And so a couple of solutions that I think Dr. King would say, and that I would urge parents, especially on this call, to go and ask, right? Asking our leadership at school, at the district level, principals, how are our lessons addressing voting? How many of our students could actually teach their younger siblings how to vote? Could they teach it back to someone else? How many students are speaking at school board meetings to ensure that they're being held accountable at the highest level for our most vulnerable? As Reverend Brown was saying, I have no idea. I was never taught. I grew up in this district, and I was never taught how to protest peacefully. Why aren't we doing that? To show them how to use that First Amendment right, how to get involved. And then, of course, identifying and information in trustworthy sites. And then lastly, and probably the most radical, I urge you to demand that we abolish and replace ISS, which is in-school suspension, and OSS, out-of-school suspension, and replace it with restorative justice and forgiveness, because we're not teaching our students anything. All we're doing is putting them back in the same situations where they're going to, unfortunately, potentially make the same mistakes again. And so I would hope that if we all demand that of our leaders, that we might see a more critically thinking student from the lens of Dr. King. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Watson, I'm calling you Dr. Watson. You should be Dr. Watson. That was awesome. And I love what you ended with. Yes. Thank you for being a teacher. You make such a big difference. And I know lots of people are going to listen to your voice. We need young leaders like you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I think we have some of the anti-racist training happening with students and teachers. I totally agree. It needs to be coupled with, after watching The Social Dilemma, if you haven't, it needs to be coupled with education from K through 12 about how media discernment, education about media discernment and choosing your sources. So much there. Yes. If you haven't watched Push Out about the problem of especially young Black girls being suspended and then put into that system. Wow, the discipline is not equal. That's something we're addressing. Let us know if you guys want to help us address these things. We've got a team doing it. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Thank you, Mr. Watson. And I want to introduce, there's so much, right? So as you're listening, find what is your calling, because we can't all do everything, but all of us can do something. So I am looking for my next friend who's been so patient, Mr. Brian Williams. You guys might know Brian. You might recognize Dr. Williams. He was the trauma surgeon at Parkland following the July 2016 tragic killings of some of our Dallas Police Department officers. And he went on to have a very authentic and emotional press conference that went viral. And from then on, it's kind of reshaped what he's been doing. He's still a surgeon, but he's also an activist. So Dr. Williams, I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend. Thank you for waiting for us.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Laurie. And I have to actually thank my wife and de facto publicist and agent for getting me booked for this evening. So thank you very much. Love you, Kathy Ann. When I think about MLK, I know we're at the end, so I'm going to just get to it. When I think about MLK, I have to acknowledge that I am a Generation X person. Therefore, that group that was born between 65 to 80, which means I was born after the Civil Rights Movement. I was in that group that was the beneficiaries of all the work that was done by folks like Ms. Roz and others. And as a result of that, two things happened. One, I had a very sanitized education about who Martin Luther King Jr. was and what he did and what he represented. And two, I became part of the generation that was very comfortable. We had arrived, what more do we need to do? And much of that changed for me after July 2016, which is a prelude to what's happening right now in our country. It's probably gotten worse in many ways. We talk about racial injustice and policing and political ideology that are really truly dividing us. It's all amplified now. But I didn't really acknowledge that until after that shooting occurred. And two things. First, we have to recognize that Dr. King was actually considered a radical during his time. He was a reviled figure. Gallup polls at the time, more people viewed him unfavorably than favorably at the time. So the sanitized version I learned does not jive with what his life was at that time. Mm-hmm. And secondly, even though I benefited from a lot from the work that was in the past, there was still more work to be done. And I realized that I had to do more, particularly after July 2016, that there was more I could be doing and more that I should be doing. I didn't have all the answers, and I kind of stumbled along, but there was two lessons there. Is that if you want to be an ally, it requires embracing your discomfort. You cannot be a comfortable ally, especially when it comes to racial justice. So you're going to show up, embrace that discomfort, and what does that say about you? Don't push that away. And secondly, you'll never know what kind of legacy you will leave. You'll do these small things on a daily basis that will lead to something tremendous. And Dr. King is not alive now. He doesn't even know we're having this discussion right now. We're talking about him right now. And as I said, back then, he was a reviled figure, not very well regarded by Americans. But towards the end of the 20th century, there's another Gallup poll. And in that poll, he was the number 2 most admired person of the 20th century. So it's amazing what a few decades will do to someone's legacy, right? And it's because he remained true to what his ethos was about equality and social justice. And he never strayed from that. He stayed focused on that. And it's been recognized that now. Mother Teresa was number 1, if you're wondering. Mother Teresa was number 1 on that poll. Dr. King was number 2. So we all can learn from that we don't know the legacy that we will leave if we remain true to our ethos, choose this life of service to a greater good and to a greater cause. And then together we can actually transform society. And that's where we stand today.
Dr. Williams, thank you so much. It's just an honor to have you here, and I appreciate the work you're doing. I love what you said about that you just knew you had to do something. And so I think that's why everyone is here. Everyone that's here is just has that feeling. We just know we want to do something. So Danita, can you unmute yourself too? Danita and I want to just follow up and ask you guys one final thought from each of our panelists. What one action step, and we'll start with you, Dr. Williams, what one action step would you have someone do just that you see as important?
Well, what I would suggest is sticking that old cliche that we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means something. So listen twice as much more than you speak, especially now when there's a lot of screaming at each other and not enough listening. So we can listen, and not just listen, but listen to understand the other side. That can lead to progress. And right now it's about listening. We're talking about Mothers Against Racism. It's about listening to our Black brothers and sisters and listening to their pain. And if you're listening to that pain, you cannot make the story about yourself. It is about them. It's about us and how do we move forward together.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Okay, listen, awesome. Mr. Utley, what's your one thing?
Open your heart.
Open your heart. Awesome. Reverend Titus, are you ready? Here you go.
I'm muted. Look at the history.
Titus is about to knock our socks off with his
Just the history books. Open your history books. Do your history. Because I don't think a lot of us take time to read the history books. Look at your history book.
Somebody take notes and send all these take actions to us. Okay. Mr. Watson, what you got?
Go to every school board meeting that you can. That's an actionable step that we all can take.
Danita, who you want to call on next?
We can call on Mr. Tyson.
want you to repeat the question because I'm getting some variations in my thought process here.
What is one action that you are charged that you give to us as we leave this space?
Oh, okay. Wow. Well, Doc mentioned a good one about listening. You know, that's one of the things that I do in my business is I teach people how to be better listeners. But I think the action is really set a goal for how you're going to be better in the next 3 months as it relates to race relations. Set a goal on how you're going to be better, just one goal, and then share that goal with someone else that's going to hold you accountable.
Love it.
Awesome. Reverend Kathy.
I'm going to say participate.
Participate. Yes.
If you participate with each other in whatever the needs are, then together we'll all be building bigger tables.
Don't be a bystander. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Danita, who else we got in
Reverend, I want to call her Reverend. Miss Ross.
Reverend Ross, I'm going to ask to unmute you, okay?
So, all of these are wonderful. And so I think that we all have to we have to open our hearts and use our heads and be in conversation with one another.
What's yours, Larry? What is your charge to the group?
Well, our common charge that we use together is make good trouble in honor of John Lewis.
I love that.
But it's so much easier to do it together. So yeah, just help us out, participate.
Right.
What about you, friend?
On top of make good trouble, I just want to implore people to always have to go back to my favorite lady. Pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living.
Yes. And you guys put your favorites in there too, your favorite take action. And if you're looking for some steps to take action, come to LHAMAR. We've got action groups and things happening. MJ,
you can sign up for those on our website at LHAMAR.com. And also we have
LHAMAR.org.
Yeah. So to all our wonderful guests, if you have not purchased one, this would be your gift. This would be sent to you. This is our calendar. It is our
diversity calendar.
It's a diversity calendar. So every family that's featured in our calendar is from our community of a different race. And so you will also get a packet that describes each one of the families.
And so Reverend Brown's family's in there. There, you guys look so cute. And the other thing I love is it has all these great, interesting days and historical days that you can teach your family about different cultures as you go. So as we're finishing up, Danita, you have anything else you want to say? I'm going to let MJ run that slideshow so you guys can choose your favorite quote, teach your family, write it in your home tomorrow. And tomorrow is a National Day of Service. So in honor of Dr. King, rake some leaves for your neighbor, deliver a meal, ask someone if you can get them groceries, pick up some trash, whatever you can do. We have over 30 families delivering Meals on Wheels in our community tomorrow with LHAMAR. So that's exciting.
Our Teens Against Racism, they're meeting this week. And if you are in our book club, don't forget, CAST is coming up. We will have this discussion. So if you are like me and you have to catch up, use your time wisely tomorrow when you're off. And we'll see you at the...
Or just read chapter 1. Make good trouble.
Take it away, MJ.
All right.
All right, everyone.
Happy
Thank you.
MLK Day.
It was wonderful to meet all of you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Y'all go out and make good trouble together. We'll continue the questions and conversation on Facebook later. So you can, if you had a question there, we'll put it on there for you. Okay. Thank you,
Super.
everybody.
Thank you all for.
Hey, Lowry, how quick are you going to publish this?
I have to give it time to download on YouTube.
Okay.
So yeah, so I'll put it on there when I do. Okay.
Awesome.
And then you can.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Good night.
night.
I'm the proud father of Lowry, by the way.
Oh, I hear my dad.
Yeah.
Hi, Dad.
Awesome, 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 awesome. Great daughter.
Good.
I love singing that song. I can't wait till next year we can all be together and sing it. Won't that be fun?
That would be awesome.
Certainly will.
And here's Lowry's mom.
Oh, hi, Mom.
Okay. All right.